First Kings chapter 3. First Kings chapter 3 tonight. I love Bible characters, and I think the more I raise my kids and you watch cartoon movies and you watch superheroes, the more I like Bible characters because they were the original heroes. I tell it all the time in Sunday school about Abraham's SEAL Team 6, the first ever SEAL team in the Bible, 318 men after Lot was taken by the kings, and Abraham, he didn't pray to nobody. He went down there and got 318 farm boys and said, come on, we're going to go get them back. And the Bible says when they returned from a great slaughter, and they whipped them, they chased them, and they hunted them down, and they killed them. First ever SEAL team in the Bible. Joseph, you can learn a lot about Bible characters. Joseph in the Bible, when we were studying in Sunday school, it hit me during that time that when Pharaoh set him number 2 to him in Egypt, that he said, well, I need somebody to take care of this. If we're going to have 7 years of plenty and 7 years of lean, I need somebody to be in charge. He said, Joseph, I'm going to make you in charge. And Joseph then filled the storehouses for 7 years. And, it would probably help our government and a lot of people to read that, because during the 7 years of lean, Joseph didn't open up the storehouses and just say, come get it, it's free. The Bible says he sold it. He sold it to the Egyptians. If you came from another country, he sold it to them. So during the lean years, as he sold that corn that he had put up, he was depleting that, but he was making money. Wonderful leader, godly leader. And we learn great lessons. One of just a character that nobody ever really talks a whole lot about, other than just maybe some of his writings, that just, some things we think about today in society and things we think about in this world. We got a lot of neat stuff. But there's a man in the Bible that had a lot more neat stuff than we've got now, and had a lot more things. And when you dig into his life, it was just miraculous. And we're going to look at that tonight. And then plus, it all went away one day when he quit following the Lord. So we're going to look at that tonight, and hopefully you'll learn something. We'll try to get through this the best we can, because I got to do something else on Sunday morning, so we can't continue. So we're going to get through this. 1 Kings chapter 3. We're talking about Solomon. So here we're kind of introduced to him here. We kick off his life. We're going to go through a lot of different chapters tonight. So you just keep your place, and we're going to roll on through 1 Kings. We're going to look at several different spots tonight. But 1 Kings chapter 3 and verse 1. And Solomon made affinity with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he had made an end of the building of his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall of Jerusalem round about. So tonight, then, this is going to be kind of like a Sunday school lesson, so we're just going to kind of break this down as we go. But so Solomon here he's probably in an arranged marriage with Pharaoh's daughter. Of course, that's not really probably the first mistake he made right off the bat, was marrying someone down in Egypt. They weren't told to do that, but still, Solomon, he's going to do okay here in a minute. So the very first thing that Solomon does, and I want you to think about some of these things tonight, and like I said, this is probably going to be a little different message, but the very first thing he does, in verse number 4, it says, and the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. 1,000 burnt offerings did Solomon offer upon the altar. Now listen, we're talking astronomical numbers here. Now when Noah got off the ark, and he was thankful that he survived the boat trip, and the earth being flooded, and only 8 people remained, and he stepped off the ark, it says that he put up a burnt offering to the Lord, a single burnt offering to God as a thanksgiving. Solomon just did 1,000 burnt offerings. So right off the bat, we're seeing numbers we don't typically see. So verse 5 says, in Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, ask what I shall give thee. Now today, in today's society, we've kind of materialized this to a genie in a bottle, or to having 3 wishes. But this is Bible. God didn't give him 3 wishes. He just said, listen, you ask something of me and I'm going to give it to you. But the same happens for us. We have not because we ask not. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God. So, I mean, it still stays the same today, but here we're just recorded about Solomon. He says, you ask something of me and I'm going to give it to you. So we go on, verse 6, and Solomon said, thou hast showed unto thy servant David, which David was Solomon's father, my father, great mercy, according as he walked before thee in truth and in righteousness and uprightness of heart with thee, and thou hast kept for him this great kindness, that thou hast given him a son to sit on his throne as it is this day. And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father, and I am but a little child. I know how to go out or come in. He said, listen, I'm young at this, I'm new at this. David was a great leader, but I'm just Solomon. And thy servant is in the midst of thy people, which thou hast chosen, a great people that cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, and I may discern between good and bad, for who is able to judge this thy so great a people? So that was his answer. He could have had anything in the world, but he said he wanted an understanding heart to be able to judge the people. He said, I realize these are your people, God, and I want to be able to judge them. I want to be able to discern between good and bad, good and evil. I want to be able to judge them right. They're your people. And the speech pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing. Verse 10. Verse 11, and God said unto him, because thou hast asked this thing and hast not asked for thyself long life. So follow along, watch this. He said, so if it had been anybody else, they would have asked for long life. I mean, we've heard that before. If you get 3 wishes, what are you going to wish for? Well, one's long life. Well, long life. Neither hast thou asked for riches for thyself. So what's the other thing you'd ask for if you got 3 wishes? You'd ask for riches. I want to be rich. I want to be powerful. I want to live long. Nor hast asked the life of thine enemies. So again, what would be better? Just say, listen, I don't have any enemies. But hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment. So he said the 3 typical things most people would ask for, you didn't, but you asked for understanding and judgment. Behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and an understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. So there you go. Solomon's going to be the wisest man to ever live. There's going to be none before him, none after him. It's going to be as wise and smart as him. And I have also given thee that which thou hast not asked. You know, God always gives more. So again, because Solomon didn't ask foolishly, God said, listen, I'm going to give you that, and I'm going to give you the other also. Both riches and honor, verse 13, so that there shall not be any among the kings like unto thee all thy days. So he says, listen, I'm going to give you riches. I'm going to give you honor. And if thou will walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments as thy father David did walk, then I will lengthen thy days. So now he says, listen, I'm going to give you riches. I'm going to give you a length of days. Now the only thing that he really leaves out here that he don't mention is the life of thine enemies. But as we're going to see here in a little bit, Solomon built such a great, we'll call it a kingdom, nobody was dare going to go attack him. I mean, so really God gave it all to him, but he gave it to him in a different way here because nobody was ever going to come and take on Solomon. So here he says, I'm going to give you this, but you notice 2 little phrases in verse 14. He says, if thou, and then later on he says, then I will. Now, I wonder where Solomon got that from where he wrote the Proverbs. See, he's heard this before, and that's why I like to study the characters, because it helps you to understand them. Now, it's good enough for me and you that this is the inspired holy word of God, but man, it helps us sometimes to think that we're not the only ones trying to listen to it. Listen, the wisest man to ever live heard the same stuff. And he wrote it down for us. In Proverbs chapter number 2, he says some of these things. He says, my son, if thou will receive my words and hide my commandments with thee. Verse 3, yea, if thou criest after knowledge and lifteth up thy voice for understanding. Verse 4, if thou seekest her as silver and searchest for her as hidden treasure. Guess what? Then it produces a result. Then, verse 5, shalt thou understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. Verse 9, then shalt thou understand righteousness and judgment and equity, yea, every good path. What's this? Verse 12, to deliver thee from the way of the evil man. So again, this evil, the enemies, to avoid those. Verse 16, deliver thee from a strange woman, even from the stranger which flattereth with her words. So he says, listen, that's where, Solomon learned this because he was told this too. If thou walk in my ways and keep my statutes and my commandments, as your father David did, then I will lengthen thy days. Same charge give to Joshua. By the Lord, Moses my servant's dead. Rise up and go over this Jordan. The book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth. I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to let you win. I'm going to give you victory, but you got to stay the course. You got to stay alongside of me. No different for Solomon. So now Solomon's wisdom is tested right off the bat, and this is the story you've always heard. Here he begins to judge, or his jurisprudence here, if you will, but the revealing of Solomon's gift. And this is the story that you're most familiar with, and we'll read it real quick just because it's a good story. Verse 16, then came there 2 women that were harlots unto the king and stood before him. And the one woman said, O my Lord, I and this woman dwell in one house, and I was delivered of a child with her in the house. And it came to pass the 3rd day after I was delivered that this woman was delivered also, and we were together there. Was no stranger with us in the house, save we 2 in the house. So up to this point, we got 2 women. Both of them had a kid, had a child, 3 days apart. And this woman's child died in the night because she overlaid it. So there was one woman that apparently wasn't a very good mom, and she overlaid her child and rolled over on top of it. She suffocated, killed it. And she rose at midnight and took my son from beside me while thine handmaid slept, and laid it in her bosom, and laid her dead child in my bosom. And when I rose in the morning to give my child suck, behold, it was dead. But when I had considered it in the morning, behold, it was not my son, which I did bear. And the other woman said, Nay, but the living is my son, and the dead is thy son. And this said, No, but the dead is thy son, and the living is my son. So what do we got? What do we hear in Southwest Virginia? Listen, it's my word against yours. Nobody's in the house. These are 2 harlots. You know what a harlot is, and ain't nobody going to listen to them anyway. And now it's her word against hers, and boy, Solomon, what are you going to do with this? So, verse 23, then said the king, the one saith, This is my son that liveth, and thy son is dead. And the other said, Nay, but thy son is the dead, and my son is the living. And the king said, Bring me a sword. And they brought a sword before the king, and the king said, Divide the living child in 2, and give half to the one and half to the other. Which obviously we know how that would work out. Then spake the woman whose the living child was unto the king, for her bowels yearned upon her son, and she said, O my Lord, give her the living child, and no wise slay it. But the other said, Let it be neither mine nor thine, but divide it. So that's the same one that rolled over on hers during the night, so some mother she is. So she said, Just divide it. We'll each take half. Then the king answered and said, Give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. She is the mother thereof. And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had judged, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to do judgment. So there's Solomon's first test of his gift, the first revealing of it. And boy, now word has spread faster. And I mean, they didn't even have CNN back in that day, but all Israel's done heard about this. And they've heard about it, and they know. And so Solomon here, and we're going to skip some things and just go through them. You can take some notes. But in chapter number 4, you know, this is nothing that the Democrats or Republicans come up with. Listen, this has been around since Bible. Solomon had 11 members in his cabinet. He put a cabinet together. And you find that there in chapter 4, verse 1 down through verse 6. So he put 11 members of a cabinet together to take care of political matters. So he was real smart in administration. So we saw his judicial. Now we're seeing his administration. And verse 7, and Solomon had 12 officers over all Israel, which provided victuals for the king and his household. Each man his month in a year made provisions. So he basically put 12 key men, one from each tribe, over, and each month they would take turns and they would take care of the victuals for the king's house. Each man his month in the year made provision. So he set these 12 key men from each tribe to take care of the food supplies. And you're going to see why that's important here in a minute. Because this isn't just cooking supper for a family of 4. So he set these guys over this. So he goes on down, and in verse 21, chapter 4, verse 21. And Solomon reigned over all kingdoms from the river unto the land of the Philistines and unto the border of Egypt. They brought presents and served Solomon all the days of his life. And Solomon's provision, so here's where you need to start paying attention. And Solomon's provision for one day, not 2, not a week, not a month, one day, was 30 measures of fine flour and 60 measures of meal, 10 fat oxen and 20 oxen out of the pastures, and 100 sheep, besides harts and roebucks and fallow deer and fatted fowl. So what that means is the provision. So you say, what in the world would he need somebody over the victuals for the day and the rations and the food? Well, here's the reason. Because in one day, they would use 150 bushels of flour, 300 bushels of meal, 30 oxen, 100 sheep, which is bigger than most people's hobby farms, 100 sheep a day, plus various other items like fallow deer, roebucks, and fatted fowl that they'd go out and hunt. One day. Now that's cooking supper. Next time you complain about cooking supper, going to Food City, you might want to think about that. 100 sheep, 30 oxen, 150 bushels of flour, and 300 bushels of meal. Verse 26. And Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses. Now, I don't know how many horses you put in the stall, maybe just one, but I mean, that's a lot of horses. 40,000 stalls of horses. 40,000. Now listen, I mean, if a president gets a new dog, you hear about it. I mean, this man had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. And those officers provided victuals for the king Solomon and all that came unto King Solomon's table, every man in his month. They lacked nothing. Verse 28 actually tells you that they took care of the animals, barley also, and straw for the horses. Verse 29, and God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding exceeding much, and largeness of heart. So that's how it's described with, he expanded his mind, this largeness of heart. He expanded Solomon's mind, even as the sand that is on the seashore. And Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country and all the wisdom of Egypt. So, I mean, it goes on here, verse 31, and he was the wiser than all men. It starts naming them. There was wise men during that day, Ethan and so on and so forth. And Solomon was wiser than all those. Watch this, verse 32. And he spake 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. And he spake of trees, from the cedar tree that is in Lebanon, even unto the hyssop that springeth out of the wall. He spake also of beasts, and of fowl, and of creeping things, and of fishes. And there came of all the people to hear the wisdom of Solomon from all the kings of the earth, which had heard of his wisdom. So what does that tell us? Well, we call it this. He was strong in literature. He was strong in poetry. He was strong in forestry. He was strong in zoology. I mean, anything else you could think of. It wasn't just that he had good judicial experience or administration, but he knew about zoology. He knew about forestry. Today, we're so happy and get tickled when somebody graduates and gets a master's degree in something. He had a master's degree in everything, a doctorate. I mean, he knew about all these things. So now let's look on to what else he was so smart about doing here. Chapter 5. So one thing about Solomon was he always liked to set people in charge because, again, that's what you do. And he's got a large company here. He's getting ready to build the temple. This is Solomon's temple, the first temple. We've been in the tabernacle, which the tabernacle, you broke it down, you put it back up when Israel moved. And, man, now we're going to build a permanent house of the Lord. Big deal. David saved all this money and saved the things and didn't get to build it. Now Solomon's tasked with building it. So he's got a big job ahead of him. But he's also king, and Solomon likes things, and his mind's a lot broader than yours and mine. And, man, he's going to have him a nice throne too. He's going to have him a nice house. So he's got some work to do. He sets two men. We're introduced to the first one in chapter number 5 and the other over in chapter number 7. And don't get these two confused. But because they both have the same name. I kind of wonder how that went while he was hollering out orders to them. But both these guys have the same name. The first one's found in chapter 5. The other's found in chapter 7. Hiram. So Hiram in chapter number 5 is a king. And he's going to be in charge. He's a king. And he's going to join forces with Solomon here because he's got a lot of timber. He's got a lot of timber, and he's going to supply the cedar, and he's going to supply the wood for the temple and for Solomon's house. And they're going to kind of join cords here, if you will, because, again, he's a king, so they could be against each other, but he's decided it's easier just to work for Solomon. So we see that there in chapter 5, verse 1, we see Hiram the king. And it said down in verse number 6 of chapter 5, it says, Now therefore command thou that they hew me cedar trees out of Lebanon. And my servants shall be with thy servants, and unto thee will I give hire for thy servants according to all that thou shalt appoint. For thou knowest that there is not among us any that can skill to hew timber like unto the Sidonians. So here he said, listen, I want you to be over the lumber. I want you to be over the logging operation. I want you to be over getting these trees and hewing them out. So verse number 10. So Hiram gave Solomon cedar trees and fir trees according to all his desire. And Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 measures of wheat for food to his household and 20 measures of pure oil. Thus gave Solomon to Hiram year by year. So his yearly payment to this king, to Hiram, his number one man in charge here, was 100,000 bushels of wheat and 110,000 gallons of oil a year. He paid him year by year till the work was done. Verse 13, and King Solomon raised a levy. So what that means is he started enlisting not for battle, so he didn't draft for battle, but he drafted for laborers. So he did a levy, raised a levy out of Israel, and levy was 30,000 men. And he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month by courses. A month they were in Lebanon, and 2 months at home. And Adoniram was over the levy. So they spent a month working and 2 months home. So, there's some people that work 24-hour shifts, and then they get to go home, and then some of us work 12-hour shifts or 8-hour shifts. We fuss about that. Man, these guys gone for a month. Then you spent 2 months at home. Then you went for another month. And Solomon had 70 and 10,000 that bear burdens, and 80,000 hewers in the mountains, beside the chief of Solomon's officers, which were over the work, 3,300, which ruled over the people that wrought the work. And the king commanded that they brought great stones, costly stones, and hewn stones, to lay the foundation of the house. And Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders did hew them, and the stone quarries. So they prepared timber and stones to build the house. So what does all that, we read through that quick. So he got 30,000 laborers. He got 70,000 more laborers, plus 80,000 loggers. I mean, again, we're not talking about, man, we work 150 people. I mean, utility trailer's big, but it ain't that big. I mean, listen, he's got 80,000 loggers to go hew these logs. 3,600 foremen. So, number one, Hiram here is going to provide the cedars. Chapter 6, verse 1. And it came to pass in the 418th year after the children of Israel were come up out of the land of Egypt, in the 14th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month Ziph, which is the second month, that he began to build the house of the Lord. So here we go. We started the temple. We better move quick. So we're running out of time. So he's starting to build the house. So also chapter 7, verse 1, but Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished all his house. He built also the house of the forest of Lebanon. So he was building his house at the same time. He built the house of the Lord. He's building a house in Lebanon. He's building his summer home, his winter home. Man, I mean, this guy had it. So then he actually if we were all rich and, you can't get along with your wife, here you could do what Solomon did. Solomon must not like that she lived there with him, so he just built her own house. So in verse number 8, it says, in his house where he dwelt had another court without the porch, which was of the like work. Solomon made also an house for Pharaoh's daughter. So he thought, well, here, I'll just make you a house too, whom he had taken to be wife, like unto this porch. So he made her a house. So now everybody's getting a house. Verse 13 of chapter 7. And King Solomon sent and fetched Hiram. So here's our Hiram number 2. He was a craftsman. Let's look down in verse 14. Later on in the verse, we're going to move on for time's sake. It says, he's filled with wisdom and understanding and cunning and work of all works of brass. So here was his craftsman. He worked brass, he worked gold, he worked silver. When you're King Solomon, you got to have all these things. All right, so we're going on. So chapter 7, verse 51, so it ended the work that King Solomon made for the house of the Lord. So he's finished the house of the Lord. So we're going to go on here, and now let's get over real quick to a couple things. So chapter number 8, so they've finished the house of the Lord, and, anytime, we've went from the tabernacle, we've went now to the temple, and they're going to dedicate this thing to the Lord. And if you're Solomon and you got all this wisdom and all this money and all this power, man, are you going to do a sacrifice? They ain't never seen a sacrifice like this. So they're going to sacrifice for this temple and make an offering unto the Lord. So chapter 8, verse 63. And Solomon offered a sacrifice of peace offerings, which he offered unto the Lord. Get ready. Here you go. You ain't never seen nothing like this. 22,000 oxen, 22,000 oxen, and 120,000 sheep. 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. So the king and all the children of Israel dedicated the house of the Lord. So to put that in a little bit of perspective, because we have a lot of pity on Job, the day that Job lost everything. So the day Job lost everything, he had 500 yoke of oxen, which that's 2 apiece, so that's 1,000. So we just offered 21 more thousand than Job lost on the day that we feel so sorry for Job. Job lost 7,000 sheep that day. Well, we just sacrificed 120,000. And think about that. I think people a lot of times, I'm going to run a real quick rabbit. People today really, they despise Jesus on the cross because of the blood. But blood was what this thing was all about. Listen, that's why I love to put this in perspective. I mean, listen, if we slayed 120,000 sheep and 22,000 oxen, I mean, I'm going to tell you, we're talking a river of blood flowing out of those animals and away from that. So, I mean, I think that's what people miss about the temple and the tabernacle and all that. Where those sacrifices was taking place, I mean, there was a river of blood. It has no choice to be. I mean, we're talking 142,000 animals right here at one time. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, it takes us a half a day to get up 100 sheep and work them. But they just got together 120,000 to sacrifice. So it's astronomical. So chapter 9 gives a second warning, or a second visit from God and a warning. So God gives Solomon a warning here, and I really want you to get this, but we're moving quick because we got to get done. Verse 4, chapter 9. If thou wilt walk before me as David thy father walked, in integrity of heart and in uprightness, and do according to all that I have commanded thee, and will keep my statutes and my judgments, then I will establish the throne of thy kingdom upon Israel forever. So he said, you know, I'm going to do this. And I'm going to paraphrase. But he says, where much is given, much is required. He goes on down through verse number 9. He says, listen, but if you stray from me, I'm going to tear this house down, and I'm going to make Israel pray to everybody around them. I mean, you're going to wish, I mean, God gives Solomon, I wish we had time to read it, he gives him a stern warning. Probably more than most people in the Bible. So where much is given, much required. He said, listen, he said, as long as you follow me, but if you don't, I'm going to tear this house down, and I'm going to give Israel pray. I mean, I'm going to make you sorry. He gives him a stark warning here. And so he goes on, and just to show you, hit a few highlights here, chapter number 9, verse number 19. And all the cities of store that Solomon had, and cities for his chariots, and cities for his horsemen, and that they which Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem and Lebanon and all the land of his dominion. So I don't know if you caught that, but we're pretty impressed if somebody owns a whole apartment building. If somebody owns a big, an entire bank building. Solomon built cities to house his chariots. Here people build a barn to keep tractors in. He built cities to house his chariots. Had cities. So verse 26. And King Solomon made a navy of ships. Listen, that just, I mean, the first time we heard about ships ain't Pearl Harbor. I mean, this bunch, they had navies of ships. They kept them there in the Red Sea. It was commercialized. He had a navy of ships. I really want to get to this. Chapter 10, the Queen of Sheba heard of his fame. So I'm going to have to paraphrase some of this. But chapter 10 talks about the Queen of Sheba. She's come to see him. She heard about his fame. Apparently she was pretty good herself, because we're given a chapter here to her. And so, but she wanted to come see Solomon's wisdom and the house that he had built. And verse number 6 of chapter number 10 says, and she said to the king, it was of a true report, and I heard in mine own land of thy acts and of thy wisdom. Howbeit I believed not the words until I came, and mine eyes had seen it. And behold, the half was not told to me. Thy wisdom and prosperity exceedeth the fame which I heard. She said, the half wasn't even told of me. She said, I didn't believe it and had to see it with my own eyes, but the half had not even been told. Verse 14 of chapter 10. Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. Now, depending on what you Google, a talent of gold, if you figure it on the high end, it's what a man could carry, and some say on the high end is about 125 pounds. Now, I don't know if any of you know much about gold, but you don't measure gold in pounds, you measure it in ounces. So 666 talents of gold that came to Solomon in just 1 year by revenue and by taxes or whatever, that equals 1,332,000 ounces. Well, gold's sold by the ounce. I checked the price a little bit ago right before church. It's today, just since the stock market went down, gold's up to $1,920 an ounce. So just in case you was curious on today's price, that would be $2,558,772,000 worth of just gold in 1 year. I mean, we're not listening. I mean, the Bible, this is amazing. And King Solomon, verse 16, made 200 targets of beaten gold. So I guess if you have that much gold, you need to do something with it. 600 shekels of gold went in one target, and he made 300 shields of beaten gold. So he made 200 pieces of golden armor, and he made 300 golden shields. I mean, why not? Verse 18, moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory. I mean, man, if you're this kind of king, you better have a throne of ivory. And overlaid it with the best gold. So, I mean, ivory's pretty by itself, but why not just say, man, that's a nice gold throne you got there. Well, guess what's under? It's pure ivory. So, but that's not it. Verse 19, and the throne had 6 steps, and the top of the throne was round behind, and there was stays on either side on the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood beside the stays. So y'all just think lions are cool when you're out by the roadside, and you think, boy, who lives there? Well, Solomon did this, you know. He was the first one with lions here. The 12 lions stood there on one side, and on the other, upon the 6 steps, there was not the like made in any kingdom. So he liked his 2 lions so much, he just went ahead and added 12 more down the steps. And so get this, I really like this when the kids like this on Wednesday night, verse 21. And all of King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold. I mean, why not? I mean, man, we buy solo cups and throw them in the trash, or we buy stuff at Walmart. I mean, man, it was pure gold. And all the vessels of his house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. It was nothing accounted of in the days of Solomon. When you got that much gold, silver's nothing. And the king had a sea and navy in Tharshish with the navy of Haram, and once in 3 years came the navy of the Tharshish bringing gold and silver, ivory, and man, why not? Why wouldn't you just have some monkeys too? And apes and peacocks. I mean, why not? I mean, why would you not want to do that? I mean, he had apes and peacocks. Verse 25, and they brought every man his present, vessels of silver and vessels of gold and garments and armor and spices and horses and mules, a rate year by year. And Solomon gathered together chariots of horsemen, and he had 1,400 chariots. So there's these chariots mentioned again. Verse 27. So if you think, well, if silver's not counted nothing in your day, and all you do is drink out of gold, you eat out of gold, you sit on gold, I mean, listen, what are you going to do with all that silver? Well, the Bible says, well, hey, we're not going to leave that out. We're going to tell you. Verse 27, and the king made silver to be in Jerusalem as stones. Let's just make gravel out of them. And cedars, so I mean, it's like, listen, so here where if you see a gravel road, there it was silver. Why not? And cedars made he to be as the sycamore trees that are on the vale for abundance. So I mean, apparently cedars weren't real abundant or very expensive, but it didn't matter. In Solomon's day, they were like sycamore trees that just apparently grew everywhere. And it goes on to say that he got horses out of Egypt, and he got linen out of Egypt, and I mean, all that good stuff. So, it's 8 o'clock. We're going to hurry. Chapter 11. So, one thing about Solomon was when he started this, if ever anybody started good, Solomon did. But the things that he kept in private started because of maybe all these things, and because maybe that he added to all these things. And, you know, it's said that he probably made the house for his wife out of Egypt, out of Jerusalem, because she couldn't be offering to her strange gods in the temple. I mean, God was in this temple. He was there. But like anything, it began to rear its ugly head because he continued to love it and nourish it and feed it, so it began to rear its head. And that's what we see here in chapter number 11. It says, but King Solomon loved many strange women. Now, I guess if you're a king that you have that much gold and you have an ivory and you have all these lines and everything, why not have more wives than anybody's ever had in their life? But verse number 2 says, of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, ye shall not go into them, neither shall ye come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their little g gods. Solomon clave unto these in love. And he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. And you know, a lot can be said about that. I guess if you can afford to build each one of them a home, you can have 700 wives. And his wives turned away his heart. And it came to pass when Solomon was old that his wives turned away his heart after other little g gods. And his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and after Milcom, and the abomination of the Ammonites. And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord, as did David his father. So, you know, again, we're done, but you can say a lot right here. But one thing about this is you see, and I think it keeps talking about his wife in Egypt for a reason, is Solomon kept these things in secret, but obviously nothing's hidden from God. And finally, they eventually reared up their head, and he had an opportunity there to do something about it. As we see a lot of times in the scriptures, in Judges and different places, they went and tore down the groves, and they tore down the idols that they offered and worshiped to Ashtaroth and to Balaam and all that. But here, the sad thing is, the Bible goes on and tells us that now Solomon was so turned to this that he started even worshiping to the little g gods, to Ashtaroth and all these things. And man, you think about, I tell my Sunday school class all the time, you think, how in the world would this happen? But I mean, man, this is that crowd. This is just what they did. And it's a shame, but it still brought a reproach upon God. I mean, man, listen, I'll never get over, the nation of Israel was there at the Red Sea. They was there when Pharaoh and his army got destroyed. Poor old Moses couldn't even go up on the mount no more than 40 days, and they looked at Aaron and said, get up, and we need something to worship, make us a golden calf. I mean, that's that crowd. I mean, and listen, that's why sometimes, you know, coming to church is not, I mean, listen, we ain't been at the Red Sea. We ain't seen all that. This bunch of people, they seen all kinds of stuff. And they still just failed. And here Solomon, he went after these little g gods. And likewise did he for all his strange wives, which burn incense and sacrificed unto their little g gods. Verse 8. So there, it says that, you know, he eventually just started doing this himself. Now, we're going to close with this and be done. But in your own time, and the rest of chapter 11, God starts to bring about what he said would happen. He starts to bring about the civil war. He starts to bring about turmoil and trouble. And again, if you know, it's neat to hear about these characters, and I really enjoyed that tonight. But the thing about it is that as long as Solomon was following God, man, I mean, anything he touched literally turned to gold. But the minute he turned away from him, God did exactly what he said he was going to do. He began civil war. He began, and as we know later on, Solomon's temple gets destroyed, and all that comes to pass. But the wisest man to ever live was able to let his heart turn and worship little g gods and offer them sacrifices and offer them incense. I mean, think about that. But hopefully that puts Solomon in perspective tonight. I tell you, we look around this world and think we got a lot of neat stuff, but I tell you, when you compare it to that of Solomon, it's just, I mean, the half's not been told. It's unreal, isn't it? It's amazing.